everyone, my name is Tara McLaughlin and I'm a deep learning coach here in the St. James Assiniboia School Division. And previous to doing that, I was a high school English teacher, and one of my favorite things to do was match kids with their perfect fit books. So today's session is going to be about finding texts for reluctant readers. And my learning intention for our session together today is to, number one, introduce you to a whole bunch of books that I know kids love to read, aged probably middle school to high school, as well as give you a strategy that you can use to help students preview books and find a list of books that they would like to read in their upcoming reading time. So obviously I'm set up from home here. I've got my laptop over to the side with my speaking notes. I'll be consulting that on a regular basis, and I have a pile of books on the floor here, so I'll be leaning down to pick up the books as well. So first things first, I've already introduced myself. One of the things I wanted to mention when it comes to having kids pick books that they want to read is that if students are interested in a topic, they will always read up. Meaning that if a text is above their reading level, whatever we want to define that as, but they are interested and engaged in the topic, they will be able to read up to that reading level. And what that usually means is they also will persevere through any struggles that they're having. So if there's a word that they don't understand, they have that extra bit of motivation to figure out what the word means. If there's a concept that they're struggling with, they'll probably be more likely to go out and research that concept so they can come back to the text. So when it comes to matching kids with books, I always want to, especially reluctant readers, I always want to err on the side of what interests them first, and then monitor from there as to whether they're engaged in the book or the book is appropriate for them in terms of the reading level, knowing that they will struggle through if it is something they're truly engaged in. The first thing I usually do when I sit down with readers, all readers, not just reluctant readers, and help them find books that they want to read about, is I ask them about their hobbies, their passions, and I build on that to find books that they like. So a lot of the books I'm going to show you today are going to be anchored in those hobbies and passions that frequently come up. The other tip that I'm going to give you guys, when it comes to selecting books for readers, I always like to look for books that have the awards on them. So you can see that this book that we'll talk a little bit more about later has lots of books. So the Prince Award here is a great award to look for, this medal on a book. It's almost always, it is a young adult fiction award-winning medal. So if you see this on the front, you know it's a good read. The one down below is the Coretta Scott King Award, which means that it's a text that has been written and shares Black perspectives. And then the other one, and it's a little harder to see, is the Walter. And the Walter is a great award because it means that this is a book written by a diverse voice, meaning it's a person of color, a minority voice, perhaps a person with a disability. So those three awards to me are always great indicators of a title. So if you happen to be scanning the shelves in your classroom library or in your school library and you're not quite sure what you're looking for, these awards are always great places to start. The other thing I want to comment on is the fact that readers are going to need different things at different times, and I know this as a reader personally. So sometimes in days like today and times like today, I'm jumping back and forth between different books depending on what my needs are. So when I go out for a walk, I'm going to be listening to an audiobook. Sometimes before bed, I'm going to be doing something like, where's the one that I'm reading right now? This one right here, Go With the Flow, which is a great graphic novel about teenage girls and some social justice projects they're doing around menstruation in their school. So sometimes I'm this, but then other times I want to get lost in the world. So the other book that I happen to have going on right now is this beast of a book. So readers need different things at different times, and that's something to pay attention to with your students that you're working with. The other thing I want to say is that all of those types of books, audiobooks, graphic novels, comics, picture books, ebooks, they all count as reading. So there's no point in prioritizing one or giving one more stature over another. They're all reading, they all count, they're all a win. So if you can get kids reading, regardless of what it is, we're going to call that a win. Okay, so now I'm going to jump into some titles that I want to share with you, but I want to give you a way to keep track of all the book titles. And this is something that I'll frequently do with students as I'm doing book talks and previewing the books that I think they might want to read. So what I'm going to ask you to do right now is pause the video and go grab a pen and a paper and then come back, because I'm going to have you make a chart. All right, I'm going to assume that you've paused and you've gotten your paper, and this is what I would like you to do. So you're going to take your piece of paper, and it's going to look like this. It can be lined. I want you to fold it in half, hot dog style. for those of you that know the lingo. And then we're going to use it for 2 columns. So on one column, you're just going to write down the title of the novel or the book as I preview it to you. And in the other column, I want you to give it sort of a 5-star rating. And for today, I'm going to ask you to give it that 5-star rating based on your preferences as a reader. And that's what we would ask students to do. But what you might also want to do is, if you are working with a particular student and you know roughly what their passions and hobbies are, you could also fill this out for their passions or hobbies, knowing that you're going to go back to them and you're going to have some books to suggest for them to read. So I'll let you sort of pick the path that you want to. You can fill this chart based on your interests or the interests of a reader that you happen to be working with right now. Okay, ready? We've got that done. I'm going to dive into starting with a reader's interests. So we know that kids want to read about things that they're passionate about. And I would say that quite often sports factor into that. So these are 2 novels that I would highly recommend around the topic of hockey. So this one right here is called Power Play, and it's by Eric Walters, and he is a very, very well-known young adult fiction writer, Canadian. And this one is a great story about a young boy named Cody who wants to become a professional hockey player. And so he finds a junior league scout, really wants to help him out, and draft him to become a player on one of the best teams. And when he's drafted onto that team, the coach of that team has some particular expectations in terms of returning the favor. So great story that sort of talks about being a hockey player and maybe some of the historical issues that have come up around junior hockey leagues. This is another great hockey story. It's called Breakaway by Michael Betterman. And this one focuses around a 16-year-old named Nick. And Nick defines his life in 2 periods of time. The one before his father went to jail, where he was an A student, a talented hockey player, lots of friends, had a girlfriend, and the time after his father has gone to jail. And his father also happens to be a player on the Vancouver Canucks and was convicted of a crime, the crime of murder. So after his father goes to jail, Nick finds himself angry and bitter and alienated from all the things that he held so near and dear to him beforehand. So this story talks about Nick trying to put the pieces of his life back together again, and hopefully to save both himself and his father in the process. One topic that is often popular amongst readers and reluctant readers is anything connected to gaming, sci-fi, fantasy, and fiction. So I have 3 titles here that I would highly recommend for those types of readers. This one has been a go-to on my shelf when I was in the library, Cirque du Freak by Darren Shan. What I love about this series is that the books are manageable looking. There's a whole bunch of them in this particular series, and then Darren Shan has a couple of other series that are also super engaging. And these books almost always end in a cliffhanger ending at the end of a chapter. So that really propels students through the book and makes them want to read more. So this one is about a young boy named Darren who goes to visit a circus, and he's enthralled by one of the acts in the circus, which has to do with a spider. And he decides to steal back into the circus and take the spider home for himself. He eventually gets bitten by the spider, and that changes his life forever. He does not become Spider-Man, in case you're wondering. Something else happens. Yeah, so what I love about Cirque du Freak is that I have recommended this to so many readers, and they have loved the series. They previously not identified as non-readers and were able to whip through this series and get a whole bunch of traction in their own reading identity. Another author that I would highly recommend is Neal Shusterman. And this is one of his newest series called Scythe. And if you have kids that are into science fiction fantasy, they will love this book. In this particular book, everybody lives forever because of the technology advances. And so what they've had to do is come up with a class of people in society called the Scythes. And it is the Scythes' jobs to decide who is going to die. And each Scythe has their own unique personality when it comes to this end-of-life ritual. And in this book, what we see is the balance of power between society and the Scythes starts to get upset. It's part of a trilogy. The last one in the trilogy just came out. It was excellent. I finished reading it. And again, very, very engaging topic and kind of unique. I haven't read a lot of young adult fiction that has this particular topic connected to it. Also by the same author, and he co-wrote this one with his son, is the book Dry. And Dry focuses on a future world where we have run out of water. And so society is kind of in survival mode, which, you know, might feel a little close to home right now. As society has run out of water and one family finds itself in a particularly perilous situation and the kids end up having to leave home and fend for themselves. Again, a real page turner, and loved that this one was a co-written story between the author and his son. Another topic that I would probably want to talk to you guys about, sorry, I'm just looking at the stacks on the floor. I'm trying to figure out where to go next. Let's go to mental health. Most often I get requests for kids around topics connected to mental health issues because books help kids feel like they're not alone and that there's somebody else out there who's going through a similar struggle that they are. John Green is probably like one of the most prolific young adult fiction writers that we have right now. His stuff is so well known that it's crossed over into the adult threshold. So you will see lots of adults reading young adult fiction specifically because they picked up a John Green novel. So he's author of books like The Fault in Our Stars and Looking for Alaska. And this is his newest book, Turtles All the Way Down. And what I love about this book is that we have characters who are not afraid to talk about their mental health. And they're not afraid to say that they live in a way that's probably not always the healthiest for them, but they're trying to find ways to be more balanced. So really, really love Turtles All the Way Down for topics around mental health. And then the other book that I would probably recommend, I don't have it here with you because honestly it's the most stolen book from my classroom library. I've probably bought, I don't know, 50 copies of this book and I don't have one to show you right now. And it's called The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. I love The Perks of Being a Wallflower. Kids love The Perks of Being a Wallflower. It's a thin book, but it's really, really powerful. It's told from the perspective of Charlie. And Charlie is a teenager who's very much an outsider in his life. And he's been told by his therapist that he needs to get out there and connect more. So he starts to engage in his social community in high school a little bit more, but he doesn't always understand what he's seeing. So through a series of letters that he's writing to an unknown person, we get to see Charlie's perspective on, you know, going to his first house party, eating brownies that he probably shouldn't have, walking into a bedroom and opening a door and figuring out what he saw and what was happening. And so I love that we get Charlie's very innocent perspective on things that lots of teenagers bump into. But we also see Charlie try to rummage through his own sort of emotional situation and social anxieties. On a similar topic, I would also recommend, I read this one on ebook, so I don't have a paper copy to show you, Dear Evan Hansen. And Dear Evan Hansen is a book adaptation of a musical, so that's great if you can get some cross-medium connections there. And in that novel, the main character has also been encouraged by a therapist in order to overcome his social anxieties to write letters to sort of celebrate the positive things that are happening in his life. So he begins to write letters, and ultimately one of those letters ends up being delivered in a way that it wasn't supposed to a family who is grieving the loss of their son. And so the main character gets drawn into this family's life in a way that he didn't anticipate, and he tries to make the best of the situation, but probably makes things a little bit messier before he makes things better. So love, love, love Dear Evan Hansen. Another topic that is pretty popular with teenagers, in fact, I had a whole shelf in my classroom library that was devoted to it, was topics around addiction. And I think, you know, this is connected to mental health as well, and I think that's why it's such a popular topic. So, you know, consider these ones to have a warning on them in that sense that we are going to talk about addiction issues, but we know these are things that students are grappling with and that students find really interesting. So my first recommendation, this is the second one in the series, but the first one is called Tweak. It's on the cover there. It's called We All Fall Down. So this is book number 2. The first one is called Tweak. And this one is written by Nick Sheff. And Nick Sheff basically tells his story of addiction and recovery. And what's great about this is that Nick's father has also, I believe it's David Sheff, I can't remember. He has also written a companion novel that talks about the parent's perspective through the journey of having a young adult in your life that's addicted. The first one, Tweak, has some of the most vividly written scenes that I can still remember the way they made me feel, because he's the author, it's autobiographical, is kind of writing about his physical interaction with drugs in a way that is terrifying but also very vivid. So highly recommend these books. I know that the Sheffs have done speaking tours. They've come through Winnipeg. I think some of our high schools have actually had the Sheffs in as speakers. And there's also a movie called, I think, Our Beautiful Boy, something along those lines. So highly, highly recommend Tweak and We All Fall Down by Nick Sheff. Another series that I've had, or another author that I've had a lot of success with, is Alison Van Diepen. And so Alison has quite a few novels. This one is called Street Farm, but there are also other novels called Takedown, Snitch, and Raven. And with this one, we again have a young adult boy who has a father who's been connected to gang activity, and his father has been put in jail because of that gang activity. And the main character, Ty, needs to decide if he is going to continue in the legacy of his father and his father's gang activity, or set out a path on his own that will not have him end up in jail like his father before him has. So really, really great. High interest. And I think this is a good time to kind of take a look. One of the things I didn't say at the beginning, when you're flipping through a book to try to decide if this book is good for a student that you're working with, or it might be interesting to a student that you're working with, consider the way the text is laid out on the page. What I really love about Alison Van Diepen's book is there's lots of space between the lines, and there's lots of dialogue. So this means that you're moving through text faster, and you're getting a greater sense of accomplishment as a reader. So when you pick up books, it's always a good idea to take a look at how much text is on a page and how much spacing is between them. Lots of students will get overwhelmed by pages that are very, very dense in text and have very few lines in between them, or very little space between the lines. So this is kind of a strategy that I always like to do, to flip through a book as well, just to see how overwhelming the actual physical act of reading might be. This book has also been one of those books that was frequently stolen. Might not quite stand the test of time. I don't know how many kids are still Red Hot Chili Peppers fans, but I can tell you that when I had my classroom library, I stopped buying this book new because it was disappearing too quickly. I would only pick it up if I could find it used at Value Village, which, Western Value Village, great place for books, by the way. So this one tells the biography of the main singer from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Anthony Kiedis. And again, with this one, he's a rock star, so there's lots of things that, might be a little overwhelming to some people, but kids who love music and who know the music of the Red Hot Chili Peppers will love this book, because the music itself is often autobiographical. So you'll hear Anthony talk about the music that he's writing and how it connects to his personal experience. So again, love this book. You might want to pick it up yourself if you're a Red Hot Chili Peppers fan, but know that there's, a content warning on this one for mature audiences. The last one in this category that I want to share with you is actually had lots of traction for kids in my classroom because it's set in Winnipeg. And it's called Inner City Girl Like Me, and it's by Sabrina Bernardo. And this one is set on the streets of Winnipeg, and again, instead of having a boy in a gang situation, it's a girl in a gang situation. And she's sort of having to decide for her own safety which makes more sense, to live in a gang lifestyle or to find a way out. And so I think the fact that this is set in Winnipeg and has Winnipeg landmarks in it makes it very, very engaging to students. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about poetry. So there are lots of really, really great young adult fiction novelists that are actually writing in the format of poetry. So I'm going to name 3. And they're all very prolific, and I think students will really enjoy them. So the first one is Kwame Alexander. Kwame Alexander is a fantastic young adult fiction writer who does write entire stories through a format of poetry. And you can see how this would be really enticing to a reluctant reader, because even though it's thick, when the poems are only this long, you can really, really start to move through them. The topics are very, very engaging. They're anchored in usually things that students are passionate about. So this one has to do with music, and then this one has to do with baseball, and there's another one that's connected to basketball. And these are really, really great texts. I think students love them because, as I said, they tend to get a sense of movement and moving forward, and they move through them really, really quickly. The other one that I would mention would be Ellen Hopkins. And Ellen Hopkins, these are two of her books that I happen to have right now. This one's called People Kill People and has to do with guns. There are, a gun is bought and sold on the classified ads, and there are 6 teenagers connected to that gun and the story of that gun and what it ends up doing. And this one called Traffic has to do with child trafficking. So again, the same with Kwame Alexander's stories, told entirely through poetry. Often with Ellen Hopkins, she'll jump back and forth between 2 narrators, and you'll see that there's a change in the font to show that the narrator has changed. Ellen Hopkins has written so many great books. You can see they're all listed on the back there. And I guarantee you, if you are in a high school, your library has Ellen Hopkins in it. And if it doesn't, it should. On the topic, one more I'm going to share that's actually written in poetry, although not everything written by this author is in this format, and you'll see, is The Long Way Down. And this is the one I showed to you before that has the medals on the front, and it's by Jason Reynolds. A Long Way Down is written through poetry, and again you can see by the amount of text on a page that students are going to get a real sense of movement through this book. This book takes place between the 6th floor and the 1st floor in an elevator, where the boy in the elevator has decided that he's going to the streets to take vengeance for somebody close to him who's been killed. He's got a gun with him, and he has to make the decision between getting in the elevator on his floor and exiting the elevator in the lobby, what he's going to do with that gun when he gets to the street. And as he goes through each floor of the apartment building, he's sort of visited by different people, kind of like A Christmas Carol is. And it's through those visits with different people that he starts to see things in a different way and helps inform the decision he makes when he gets to the ground floor. By the same author, but co-written with another one, is All American Boys. You can see it's got the Coretta Scott on it as well as the Walter. And this is great because it jumps back and forth between 2 perspectives, hence the reason there's 2 authors. One of which is a young boy who just happens to be at the corner, like 7-Eleven, I think it is. It's a corner store anyways. He's at a corner store and he sees an incidence of police brutality, and he has to decide whether or not he wants to come forth as a witness to what he's seen. So we see that young boy's perspective, and then we also see another boy in the same high school who happens to be related to the police officer involved in the incident. And you get to see both sides of the story sort of evolve to a point where a community has to come to terms with what's happened. Very similar themes is The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. The Hate You Give, it was Angie Thomas's first book, and she has a second book which I actually thought was even better. This is great, and her second book, On the Come Up, was even better. The Hate You Give is a similar sort of situation where the main character in this book, Star, lives in 2 different worlds. So she lives in a community that tends to be a little bit poorer with more people of color, but she goes to a affluent white high school, and she has to figure out the 2 sides of her personalities that she needs to navigate those worlds. Ultimately, she also becomes the witness to a fatal shooting of her childhood friend, And from there, she needs to figure out what to do with the information that she has based on the first-hand witnessing that she has also participated in. Also knowing that she wants to do what's best for the person that she saw get shot, because that person is her childhood best friend. So that's The Hate U Give. And the follow-up book on the come up is also a female protagonist, and she is a rapper, and all she wants in life is to be known for her craft. And so she's doing all she can to share the message around her artistry and her perspective, but at the same time she needs to negotiate what sort of personality and what types of topics she wants to rap about. So you see her jump back and forth between what she really, really wants to do and what she feels socially responsible for doing. Both of these are, I would say, very current young adult fiction writers who your students are for sure going to love. I'm going to switch gears to young people, topics around young people in extraordinary situations. And I'm going to share this one. It's called The Bridge Home. So for those of you who aren't familiar, I'm going to sidetrack a little bit. Every year, Pernille Ripp, who is a very predominant literacy guru, classroom teacher, hosts an event or supports an event called the Global Read Aloud. And in the Global Read Aloud, they pick books for different categories of readers. And the whole point is that all classrooms around the world come together in the fall and read these books together. So The Bridge Home was the selection for 2019 Global Read Aloud. And the selection for the 2020 Global Read Aloud is actually still going on right now. So if you want to look up Global Read Aloud on Google or Pernille Ripp, P-E-R-N-I-L-L-E, Ripp, R-I-P-P, you'll come across some of the suggestions. What I love about the Global Read Aloud is it's actually focused on some very amazing Canadian Indigenous writers over the last couple years. And I know that there's some more Indigenous titles up for running this year with the voting. So the voting is open to students and teachers, and then ultimately in the fall we all get together and we read the same book together. So The Bridge Home won last year in sort of its middle grades topic. The Bridge Home is set in India with a brother and sister team who are street children. They live in the street and they're homeless. They eventually team up with two other homeless boys, and they put their resources and their time and energy together to sort of make a family and figure out how to share food, get supplies, and find joy along the way. So you really get a chance to see the life of a street child, a child living on the streets in India. And this one made me ugly cry at the end. So just consider yourself warned, but really, really a great book. Another one by Eric Walters. We mentioned him earlier in one of the hockey books. And this one has to do with teenage boys living in an overcrowded refugee camp. And what it means in the day to sort of fend off hunger and boredom, but also by the evening try to stay safe and keep their families united. So again, love that these two stories tell us the perspective of children in other parts of the world. For those of you out there that are dog lovers, again, I'm just going to warn you, this one will make you cry. So those of you out there that are dog lovers, I used this one in my lit circles in high school, and it's called The Art of Racing in the Rain by Garth Stein. Now, this has been a movie. I haven't seen the movie because the book made me ugly cry. I actually haven't gotten past the first chapter, but kids love this because the entire book is told from the perspective of a dog. So you get to see how a dog views the world, which is pretty amazing. So you get lots of descriptions of smells and things that the dog sees but doesn't quite understand. And the background of that story is that he belongs to a young man who loves racing cars, and he is himself a race car driver. And that young man falls in love and gets married and has a woman in his life, his wife, and they have a child together. And the dog is trying to navigate some of the things, the struggles that are coming up with this family, as well as other pesky things in life that dogs really don't understand, like birds and why they must be in their backyard. So really love this book, but if you are a dog owner, no, or if you're a pet owner, or if you're just a crier, this one is going to make you cry, but it really is a lovely book that people find super engaging. My next pile, I'm not going to call them dystopian books because they feel a little too close to home, but they are books that feel dystopian but are set in very current times and places. The first one has to do, it's called Internment, and it's by Samira Ahmed. And in this alternate reality, set in the US, there is some issues around peace and prosperity. And ultimately what it results in is many of the Muslim members of the community being removed from their homes and being placed in an internment camp. And so in this story we get to see a young girl as she tries to navigate life in an internment camp, as well as communicate to the world outside of the internment camp the conditions that they're living in, and maybe provide some clarity as to why this isn't right and why it shouldn't be this way. Now this one reminds me a lot of a graphic novel that I just read. This is where you're going to see my nerdiness. So any of those fans of Star Trek out there will love this graphic novel, and it focuses, it's biographical, co-written with George Takei, and he talks about his experience growing up in a Japanese internment camp. So this story to me was just a graphic novel, just an absolute eye-opener as to some of the injustices that were done right around World War II. As many Japanese American citizens, and to be honest, this happened in Canada too. Many Japanese citizens were, again, removed from their homes, had their property removed from their possession, their objects, like their possessions removed, and were sent to concentration camps. And some of the hoops they had to jump through to prove their loyalty, despite the fact that many citizens were American-born and had only ever known life in the U.S. and were contributing citizens prior to being the loss of their business and their families. So this one is also a really, really great read. I actually took this one out of the John Taylor library. So I know that it's floating around out there. And then a Canadian author that I really want to highlight, and this one was also one of the Global Read Aloud contenders this year, I believe it was. And you can see that it's got all the awards down the side there. So it's got the Canada Reads selection, it's got the Governor General's Literary Award, Kirkus Prize. So this one's a very, very award-winning novel that I really enjoyed. And again, in this particular world, the world is almost completely destroyed by global warming, and there's something unique about the marrow of Indigenous peoples that makes them highly prized, and to be honest, in the words of the novel, it makes them hunted. So this tells the perspective of a young Indigenous boy who's trying to keep he and his brothers safe and to safety in this alternate universe. And so there's lots of conversations around survival and culture, and yeah, great novel. The follow-up, or not the follow-up, but the next novel by the same author, and again that was called The Merrill Thieves, I can't remember if I told you guys that, this is on my to be read pile, so I'm probably going to tackle it during spring break, is Empire of the Wild. Again, this one is told from an Indigenous perspective, and from what I can tell, has to do more with religion, and a religion that seems to be drawing the attention of the local Métis people. Yeah, so can't wait to read that. So that's all of my novels. I'm going to do a quick run through of some graphic novels that I think will be really, really interesting for readers in middle school and high school. And the thing to remember about graphic novels is sometimes they get a bad rap because people say they're not really reading, and I completely disagree with that. Graphic novels are reading. In fact, they're reading times two, because you're reading in two different genres. You're reading in two different mediums. You're reading words and you're reading pictures. So that means that your brain is working twice as hard. Now, the reason why I think people say that it doesn't really count is because it's mostly pictures, and kids read them so quickly. And to me, those aren't disqualifications. Like, those are not reasons why we don't count it as real reading. Graphic novels are real reading. In fact, they're more reading. They're double reading because you have to read through two different types of story. So the first one I want to share is part of a series, and they're called Lowriders in Space. And the author on this one is Raoul III, the illustrator, I should say. And what I love about the art in all of the Lowriders in Space is that they are completely constructed using blue ballpoint ink pens. So there is no fancy technology that's happening here. This is just somebody who loves to draw, picking up a ballpoint pen and sketching. This one in particular, this series in particular, tends to celebrate Mexican heritage. And so you'll definitely see like the lowrider car culture in this series with a little bit of sort of like a galactic interspace theme to it. Once you tell kids that this is almost like this is entirely created with ballpoint pen, that's when you get those doodlers on board. Another really popular, you can see how popular, really popular graphic novel that I've used in lit circles is called Seconds by Brian Lee O'Malley. And in this graphic novel, the main character happens to work in a restaurant. And every day she goes to work and she has interactions with people and she questions the decisions that she makes in life. So one night, she gets a visitor, and that visitor tells her that there could be a way that she could undo the mistakes of her past. So she decides that's what she wants to do. And in this story, we see her jump back and forth between current time and her past to try to fix the mistakes of her life, and how fixing the mistakes of her life has unintended consequences for her future. So again, you can see how popular this one has been. It's got great color artwork and a really great storyline. Another one of my favorite graphic novelists is Victoria Jameson, and this is one of her slightly newer-ish graphic novels, maybe not that new, and it's called Roller Girl. Again, very vivid, colorful artwork. And in Roller Girl, 12-year-old Astrid has decided that over summer she wants to try something to sort of keep herself occupied. And she signs up for roller derby camp. And she was hoping that her best friend would join her, but she doesn't. Her best friend goes to dance camp instead. And so through a summer of becoming a roller girl, Astrid really starts to find her inner girl power and finds that, you know, doing what you love and being who you want to be are most important. Love this one by Jen Wang. It's called The Prince and the Dressmaker. And this one's sort of a more historical set novel, but not like our history, but just general in a historical time period. And in this book, the main character, there's two main characters. One is a prince and one is a dressmaker. And these two characters collide in an unexpected way. And the dressmaker has a role to play in helping the prince live out sort of an alternate reality that he wishes were more his actual reality. I don't want to say too much because it will give the plot away, but if you look at the cover, you might be able to guess. My pile is about to fall over. The one that I'm currently reading right now, which is brand spanking new, I just picked it up at McNally, which I think kids are gonna love, is called Dragon Hoops. And so Jean Lewin Yang is a great graphic novelist. I've had other graphic novels of his that kids absolutely love, somewhere around here. Oh yeah, this one's his as well, American Born Chinese. But with this one, this is actually a true story, and it's a biography of sorts. So in addition to being a graphic novelist, Jean Yang is actually a teacher. And he happens to be teaching in a high school that has a nationally recognized basketball program. So Gene is a self-identified nerd. He doesn't understand sports, he doesn't understand basketball, he lives in the artistic world of things. And so one day he realizes that there's lots of hype around the school around this year's basketball team. And he goes to talk to the coach and find out more about like what's so special about this year's basketball program, what's the hype about. And through that, Gene learns all about the history of basketball and sort of gets involved in the passion behind the sport and having a school winning team. And so I love this because I'm learning a little bit about basketball history along the way, but I'm also being pulled into a team's school's drama around having like this best basketball team ever. And spoiler alert, many of the players are focused in this particular graphic novel end up moving on to the NBA and having careers as basketball players. So this one's great, really, really love it. I'm gonna mention two more graphic novels before I wrap up. This last one is called Hey Kiddo. This is another autobiographical graphic novel. It tends to have a more subtle palette to its illustrations. And in this one, the author, Jarrett Kosira, he has reflected back on his own really troubled family history, where his mother has addiction issues and he ends up living between his mom's house and his grandparents' house, and they having a dad that's kind of absent. So with this novel, we get to see how this particular artist used art as an escape, and then eventually that passion led to a professional career, and how along the way art has been a therapy for reflecting on his history, his youth. And then one more I'm going to share is this graphic novel called Illegal. It has a more colorful palette to it, and you can see this is a great page. It bounces back and forth between two plot lines. So this is a story about two boys who have been trying to migrate to safety in Europe. So with this particular story, you can see that one brother has managed to make it and the other brother is still on his way. And it jumps back and forth between one brother's experience and the other as they attempt to reunite with each other. So that one's Illegal. All right, so that's basically almost 45 minutes of book talks. I can't even, like the stack of books is like 3 feet tall next to me, so I can't even imagine how many books we just previewed together. But my learning intentions for this time was just to give you some titles that I thought would help you connect kids with books that they love to read and that they're passionate about reading, and also give you a strategy for which to sort of help kids collect. So hopefully what you have now is a piece of paper that looks like this, but it's got a whole bunch of book titles down one side and 5-star ratings. And what's great about this is when we have kids do this, they can find their current great read, but they can also find their next great read. So we're helping them establish patterns as readers of how to be self-sufficient in selecting books that they want to read next. So again, I hope you have a sheet that's full of book titles here that you can share, or maybe even pick up yourself if you have some time to read in the next couple of weeks, or share with kids that you have in your house. Maybe you're currently working from home with some teenagers or middle schoolers that might love these books. The books are very, very easily accessible through Amazon or McNally Robinson. I know they're currently doing curbside pickup. I don't know if they're still doing this when you watch this video, but fingers crossed. As well as through the public library. And you can read graphic novels through the public library platform called, oh my gosh, I can't remember. Anyway, Winnipeg Public Library has a digital platform. You can read through it, including graphic novels, ebooks, and audiobooks. So that's another place you could be sourcing out books for yourself right now or for kids in the future. That's it. If you guys have any more questions, feel free to email me. My name is Tara McLaughlin. You'll find me in the Outlook in the staff directory. I also post a ton of book recommendations to my Instagram account, which is at Miss McLaughlin. So it's at MSMCLAUCHLAN. And then I also have a website where I post lots about books and teaching and deep learning, and that's msmclaughlin.com. So MSMCLAUCHLAN. Oh, sorry, .com. I think it's .com or .ca. .com. It's .com. Sorry, I've been sitting here for a while. My memory's going. Okay, that's it. I hope you guys had a great video. Hope you guys have a whole bunch of other great professional development experiences. If you're wanting to learn more about deep learning, I have sessions on deep learning that you can watch. One on deep learning in early years, middle years, and senior years, as well as rich texts for deep learning. Have a great day, and I'll see you at some point.